I died in the lowest class brothel. The filthy beggar spat viciously at me. What a bummer. I finally saved up enough money. As I lay dying, my consciousness wandered aimlessly. I saw my mother-in-law and Mrs. Jiao plotting a sting operation to catch the couple in the act. I watched as Lu Rian stepped over my dead body to become the legitimate wife. I saw my mother-in-law forcing my child to call Lu Rian mom. If he didn't, he'd get slapped. My son, Lu Mingzhi, is only 3 years old, and every day his face is covered in bright red handprints. My daughter, Lu Yueying, was only 1 year old when they abandoned her in the backyard, left her to fend for herself, and let her starve to death. I was seething with rage and lunged forward, intent on tearing their throats out, but I couldn't touch their bodies. It turns out that everything I've been through was all thanks to my mother-in-law. If I could do it all over again, I would make her pay for her crimes with her own blood. Main text. My name is Su Jin, and I am the youngest daughter of a 5th-rank civil official. When I was 15, I married Lu Chuan, the eldest son of Chancellor Lu, for years after entering the household. She gave birth to a son and a daughter. Lady Lu Qiaowan, the chancellor's wife, had no children of her own, yet she blamed me for the fact that the chancellor's household lacked heirs. Her father-in-law was busy with official duties and rarely visited her room. In fact, Chu Yunyang, the concubine maid who attended to him, came to see her more often. She couldn't stand seeing my husband and me so in love, so she used my lack of children as an excuse to arrange for my husband to take 4 concubines in quick succession. One of the guests was her niece, Lu Rian, who had traveled a long way to be there. One day, as usual, I went to pay my respects to my mother-in-law, but she made things difficult for me in every way and ordered me to fast for 3 days at the Temple of the Childless, praying devoutly for a child. I suppose, since that's the case, I might as well go to the temple to find some peace and quiet. Who would have thought that? Late at night, 2 monks would break into my room through a secret passage, clamp their hands over my mouth, and pin me down on the bed. Their lewd laughter rang in her ears like a demonic chant. Didn't you come here to ask for a child, madam? Well, we're here to give you one. Where's Su Tao? Where is Su Tao? I turned my head to look outside. Is the lady looking for your little maid? The rogue monk grinned wickedly and said, Don't worry, madam. She has other brothers to attend to her. She probably doesn't have time to worry about you right now. I screamed for help with all my might, but no matter how hard I tried, all that came out was a series of muffled sounds, and I gradually began to lose hope. In the dead of night, my mother-in-law actually brought people to the temple to catch me in the act, publicly berating me as a shameless slut. By then, there was a pool of blood beneath me. It must have been the child I had just conceived. Lost during this ordeal, ignoring the excruciating pain in my stomach, I tried desperately to explain. I'm not a sluthy the ones who defiled me. But no one believed me. Lu Rian, arm in arm with my husband who had always loved me deeply, watched this farce with a smug expression. My husband knew I wouldn't do that, but he didn't speak up for me. My mother-in-law pretended to spare my father a 5th-rank official a modicum of face. She did not have me drowned in a pig's cage, but simply banished me from the chancellor's mansion with a single letter of divorce. She then used my moral failings as an excuse to, quite naturally, withhold my entire dowry. When my parents found out that I had been sleeping with a stranger at the temple dedicated to the god of children, they were so ashamed that they refused to acknowledge me. Only my older brother tried several times to take me home, but he was severely beaten by my father and nearly lost his life. In the depths of winter, with nowhere else to go, I had no choice but to beg on the streets, asking passers-by for a bite to eat. She was unwittingly targeted by a villain for her beauty, sold into the lowest class brothel, forced into prostitution, and ultimately abused to death. I was reborn on the day Lu Rian entered the mansion. In her previous life, it was at tonight's welcome banquet that Lu Qiaowan slipped a potion into her husband's hangover soup, allowing Lu Rian to take advantage of the situation and make the situation irreversible. In this life, I still haven't come to my senses. Just then, Su Tao spoke respectfully. Young madam, The lady has instructed that since our cousin is arriving at the estate today, a welcome banquet will be held this evening. And she would like to invite you to attend. No sooner had the words left my mouth than I slammed my fist down on the table. Su Tao was so frightened that she knelt down. I forced myself to suppress my anger, motioned for her to stand up, and said coldly, "Aunt Lu, tell your husband to go buy me the strongest medicine available." Mrs. Lu was the housekeeper I brought with me from my parents' home, after I was divorced in my previous life. She and Su Tiao were both beaten to death. "Young madam, what medicine would you like?" I gave her a look, and she blushed and backed away. After the dinner party, I knocked on my father-in-law's door, carrying a bowl of hangover soup packed with potent ingredients. "Father, your daughter-in-law has prepared a hangover remedy for you and my husband." I handed the sobering-up soup to the servant and asked him to help my father-in-law drink it. He then instructed the maid, "Once the lights are out in the room, go and bring the younger cousin here. If this succeeds, I will set you free." Lu Rian assumed the maid had been sent by her mother-in-law, and she was overjoyed. Before entering the room, she made sure to slip the maid a large handful of silver. "Please go back and thank my aunt for her kindness. I will certainly take good care of her in the future." She entered the room with a look of joy on her face, and before long, moans could be heard coming from inside. The next day, the sound of the mother-in-law's scolding echoed throughout the chancellor's mansion. Lu Rian wept bitterly on her father-in-law's bed, overcome with shame, and with the constant roaring in his ears. The father-in-law slapped his mother-in-law so hard she fell to the ground. You dare hit me? Good heavens! How could you do something so shameless? She's my own niece." The mother-in-law cried as she pointed at her father-in-law and scolded him. The father-in-law said angrily, "You jealous woman, you have no sons of your own, and I have been nothing but kind and fair to you. All these years, I have never taken a single concubine. Even Chuaner's birth mother was merely a maid. Now that things have come to this, I shall take Rian as my concubinate will serve as an explanation to the Lu family. What can you do about it?" Her mother-in-law still wouldn't let it go. She stepped forward, reaching out to scratch Lu Rian's face, and screamed furiously, "You little slut! That bastard son of his can't satisfy you, so you dare to steal your aunt's man." In a fit of anger, the father-in-law ordered the servants to make immediate preparations so that Lu Rian could be carried into the house in a palanquin that very day to become a concubine. Lu Rian had initially felt a sense of shame, but after being berated and beaten by her mother-in-law, that shame turned to resentment. "Aunt, go ahead and make a scene. We're both daughters of the Lu family. Anyway, once you've died of anger, I'll take your place as the chancellor's wife and the Lu family won't lose out either." There was a commotion in the backyard for several days. Later, when I went to pay my respects, I sincerely brought up the matter with my father-in-law. "Father, after all, Xu Yunyang is my husband's birth mother. She has served you for 20 years and bore your eldest son. She has both merits and hardships to her credit. Now that you have concubine Lu, it would be inappropriate to have Xu Yunyang continue as a concubine, though I may be unfilial. I wish to petition on Xu Yunyang's behalf for a formal status." When my husband saw my eyes light up, he was filled with gratitude. Her father-in-law thought this made sense, so he took Xu Yunyang as his concubine. Xu Yunyang had been oppressed by her mother-in-law for 20 years. But today she finally gained a proper status and no longer had to serve as Lu Xiaojuan's foot-washing maid day in and day out. "Thank you, young mistress." Concubine Xu made a move to kneel, so I quickly helped her to her feet. "You mustn't, madam. After all, you are my husband's own mother." With a wave of my hand, Su Tao ushered in a strikingly beautiful woman. I had sent someone specifically to a brothel to select her. She is exceptionally skilled. With her here, the inner quarters will be even livelier. "Auntie, I know you don't like to argue with people, which is why you've had to put up with so much injustice. This is Yu Jianyang. She's both beautiful and kind-hearted. If necessary, you could have Jianyang attend to father, so that Lady Lu and Auntie Lu won't have their eyes fixed on you all the time." On the very first day Xu Yunyang was elevated to the position of chief concubine, Lady Lu deliberately made her kneel all morning holding a cup of scalding hot tea. When the tea grew cold, she had a maidservant pour her a fresh cup. Chu Yunyang was timid, so even when she was wronged, she could only put up with it. But who wants to be bullied all the time? If you can't beat 'em, run from 'em, Chu Yunyang said gratefully. You've thought of everything. Madam, I thank you. Ever since my father-in-law took Lu Rian as his concubine, he seemed to have discovered a new passion, spending every other night in her room. After all, Lu Rian was young and beautiful, and her father-in-law was in the prime of his life. My mother-in-law was causing a huge commotion in the courtyard, either smashing things or taking her anger out on the maids. That little bitch. The mother-in-law slammed the teacup down hard on the maid. Didn't Master say he only cared about matters of state, not romantic affairs? Why is it that ever since she came to the mansion, Master has been spending every night in her room? It's just because he thinks I'm too old. Mrs. Giao wanted to step forward and comfort her, but when she saw the excess fat on her mother-in-law's body and the wrinkles on her face, she didn't know how to begin. All I can say is, Madam, please calm down. After all, she's just a concubine kept for entertainment. You, on the other hand, are the legitimate wife. I heard about this in the courtyard and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Already getting angry. The best is yet to come. Lu Chuan saw me smiling and asked curiously, what are you smiling about? Madam, I ignored him. I hated his cowardice and callousness. If he hadn't been as weak and helpless as Zhu Yunyang, why would my child and I have had to suffer so much in our past life? Seeing that I wasn't responding, he scratched his head and went back to what he was doing. Her father-in-law happened to drop by to see Zhu Yunyang's new courtyard, but Zhu Yunyang cowered in fear and dared not attend to him. It was simply because, for the past 20 years, every time she attended to her father-in-law, she would end up getting beaten by Lady Lu afterward. Her father-in-law suddenly lost interest. But before leaving, he couldn't help but ask her, it's been so many years, and this isn't the first time. What on earth are you afraid of? Do you think I'm going to eat you? I'm not feeling well, Chu Yunyang replied in a low voice, then gently pushed Yu Jianyang out. Why don't we let Jianyang attend to you? Sir. The father-in-law cast a casual glance at Yu Jianyang, who stood there with a graceful posture, her eyes sparkling and her gaze alluring. She's so alluring. My father-in-law can't keep up. But he still hesitated and said, well, that doesn't seem right. Seeing the look on her father-in-law's face, Yu Jianyang knew the fish had taken the bait. She stepped forward, took her father-in-law's hand, and said in a sweet voice, Father. Seeing that she was taking the initiative, her father-in-law didn't object, and the two of them walked together into another room. Concubine Zhu listened to the noise coming from the next room, which hadn't stopped all night, and couldn't help but clench the bedding tightly, then let go inside. Early the next morning, my father-in-law went to court. Feeling refreshed and in high spirits, Chu Yunyang brought a bowl of nourishing soup to Yu Jianyang and said gently, Here, I made this soup myself. Since this is your first time, you really need to take good care of yourself. Yu Jianyang asked in surprise. Auntie, aren't you jealous? Xu Yunyang smiled wryly and said, I was once just a concubine's maid. Now that I've become a secondary wife, I'm already quite content. Yu Jianyang was deeply moved, having grown up in a brothel. Consort Xu was the first person other than me to treat her so kindly. She lifted the bowl of soup and drank it all in one gulp. The father-in-law's frequent visits to Xu Yunyang caught the mother-in-law's attention. Aunt Diao, she asked in puzzlement. Why has Master suddenly started coming over to this old woman's courtyard every day? Mrs. Diao was taken aback. She didn't dare say that her mother-in-law and concubine Xu were the same age, so she simply said she would go and find out. As soon as Aunt Diao asked around, another batch of teacups was smashed in the main courtyard. So much for Xu Yunyang. She always acts so gentle and obedient, yet she dares to sneak women into the master's chambers. Someone, bring that slut here. Xu Yunyang knelt on the ground, curled up into a ball, not daring to lift her head. and pleaded repeatedly. Please calm down, madam. Yu Jianyang knelt behind her, her back straight and her expression calm. The mother-in-law stepped forward, grabbed Yu Jianyang by the hair, and snarled. I suppose you're that little slut. You seductive vixen, how dare you seduce the master? I'll beat you to death. I had someone inform my father-in-law earlier, saying only that my mother-in-law was in the main courtyard and intended to kill Yu Jianyang. The father-in-law rushed over just in time to see the mother-in-law clutching Yu Jianyang's hair tightly. In a fit of rage, the father-in-law kicked his mother-in-law in the chest. The mother-in-law fell to the ground, clutching her chest, and couldn't catch her breath for a long time. Mrs. Diao hurriedly sent someone to call a doctor. The father-in-law carried Yu Jianyang away, leaning against his chest. She sobbed softly. Master Liu, will you truly not grant me a proper status? The father-in-law was thrilled to hear this. How could he possibly refuse? My mother-in-law was recuperating at the main residence, but she wasn't getting any better. The doctors all said it was because she had been kicked in the chest, and combined with the emotional distress she was feeling. That was why her recovery was taking so long. I took this opportunity to seize control of the household and replaced all the servants and maids in the mansion with my own people. My mother-in-law was confined to the main courtyard all day, recuperating from her injuries, unable to move about. She had less to do and more time to think. As time went on, she seemed to gradually come to her senses. All the bad luck she's had lately is my doing. Furious, she summoned me to the main courtyard, unleashed a torrent of abuse on me, and demanded to know if I was deliberately trying to make her life miserable. I just smiled and replied, "You're overthinking it, mother-in-law. I mean no harm. Please don't get upset, you'll only make yourself sick." Her punch landed on nothing but air, and she felt a sharp pang of pain in her chest. She then instructed Madame Diao to bring the two young ladies upstairs. A slender young woman with a graceful waist. She had a graceful figure and slender fingers. As far as I'm concerned, these two are old acquaintances. In my previous life, my mother-in-law had also brought them in to be Lu Chuan's concubines. Not only did they pester Lu Chuan day in and day out, but they also relied on my mother-in-law's backing to throw barbed remarks my way from time to time. These are the Luo sisters. Ying excels at dance, and Miao Miao excels at the pipa. Both are exceptionally talented and beautiful. Your family, the Seuss, is a distinguished line of civil officials. I'm sure the daughters you've raised are of the finest character. Take these two home with you today, and be sure to provide them with a fine place to live. My mother-in-law looked as if she were waiting to see me make a fool of myself, but I obediently agreed, ignoring her smug laughter behind me, and turned to lead the others to my father-in-law's courtyard. I knelt on the ground and pleaded earnestly, "Father, please forgive mother." My father-in-law was bent over his desk handling official business, puzzled for a moment. He set down his brush and ink and asked me what had happened. My daughter-in-law just went to visit her mother, who is still deeply troubled. She reflects on her mistakes every day and repeatedly urged my daughter-in-law that, as the legitimate wife, she must be broad-minded and must never let jealousy take root in her heart. After a brief pause, I deliberately drew my father-in-law's gaze to the Luo sisters standing behind me and said meaningfully, "Your mother, mindful of your father's daily toil and official duties, wishes to make amends for past mistakes. She has specially sought out the Luo sisters Ying, who excels in dance, and Miao Miao, who is a master of the pipa. Both are gifted in both beauty and artistry. Your mother has instructed your mother-in-law to bring them here, hoping only to ease your father's mind and relieve his weariness. Seeing mother's sincerity in this matter, I am certain she truly repents and thinks of father day and night. I implore father to remember their many years of marriage and grant mother forgiveness." The Luo sisters realized something was wrong and were about to speak up, but when they looked up and saw their father-in-law's calm, handsome face, they silently closed their mouths. Her father-in-law assumed that taking 3 concubines in quick succession had made his mother-in-law feel threatened, so she had sent this beauty to win her husband's favor. Since she had taken the initiative to admit her mistake, her father-in-law naturally went along with it, and that very night he kept the Luo sisters in the courtyard to attend to him. At night, the melodious strains of the pipa drifted softly through the courtyard. Hearing that, My mother-in-law smiled, and I smiled too. The next day, after gathering the news, Madame Diao staggered back to the main courtyard. Just as she was wondering how to report it to her mother-in-law, she saw her father-in-law coming toward the main courtyard. It was rare for the father-in-law to visit the main courtyard. And as soon as he entered the room, he praised his mother-in-law for becoming even more virtuous and magnanimous. She was so taken aback that she stood there speechless. Before long, a maidservant entered, curtsied, and reported. The master's 2 new concubines have come to present tea to the mistress. No sooner had the words left his mouth than the Luo sisters appeared. Walking gracefully toward them, the mother-in-law's expression suddenly darkened. She slammed one hand down on the table and glared fiercely at Aunt Diao, who trembled all over with fear and bowed her head in terror. Seeing this, the father-in-law asked, "What are you doing? Wasn't it you who told Jeaner to send Ying Ying and Miao Miao to my room?" Diao Mama, frantic with anxiety, tugged at her mother-in-law's sleeve, signaling that, given the circumstances, she had no choice but to accept the reputation of being a virtuous woman. After all, her father-in-law had been neglecting her for quite some time. If she turned against him now, he would likely come to despise her completely. The mother-in-law forced down the raging fury in her heart, managed a stiff smile, and explained, "It was I who sent them. I was simply upset that on their first day of paying their respects, they arrived later than the master himself. It was truly lacking in propriety." "Don't be upset, madam. They were very tired last night, so I told them to get some extra sleep," her father-in-law said in her defense. Her mother-in-law grew even angrier. She was so furious she could hardly breathe and clutched her chest tightly. Her father-in-law thought he must have kicked her too hard last time. Several months had passed, yet she still hadn't fully recovered. So he felt a bit more guilty and decided to spend the night in the main courtyard. The mother-in-law was seething inside but couldn't vent her anger. Instead, she had to put on a show of being gentle and virtuous in front of her father-in-law, bottling it all up for an entire day. As soon as her father-in-law left that morning, she could no longer hold on. Overcome with grief, she fell ill and was bedridden, unable even to get up. A few months later, word spread from the side courtyard that Lu Rian was pregnant. The news had barely spread for half a day when Yu Jianyang came to see me with tears in her eyes. She hesitated before speaking. "Young madam, may I have a child of my own?" I stepped forward, gently took her slightly cool hand, led her to a seat nearby, and said gently, "Of course." Yu Jianyang murmured softly, But master visits my quarters far more often than he does concubine Lu's. Now that concubine Lu is with child, why has there been no sign of a pregnancy for me? Is there something wrong with my body?" My heart sank, and I immediately ordered the maid to fetch a doctor. The doctor looked grave as he took his pulse, and it was a moment before he let go. "Young madam, the concubine's pulse is steady. Her qi and blood are still sufficient, and there is nothing seriously wrong with her health. Logically speaking, she shouldn't be having trouble conceiving. May I ask, has she been taking any herbal decoctions?" Yu Jianyang shook her head. "I've always been in good health and have never taken any herbal remedies." Then she seemed to think of something else. She grabbed my hand and said excitedly, "Concubine Zhu often sends me nourishing soups. Every few days, Zhu Yunyang would personally prepare a pot of soup for her, saying it was to help her recover her health. She was grateful for Zhu Yunyang's kindness toward her, so she drank every drop without fail, never once harboring any suspicion. I immediately ordered someone to bring the soup she had left over from today so the doctor could examine it. As soon as the doctor smelled it, he furrowed his brow and declared outright that a potion designed to prevent conception had been mixed into the soup. I immediately had Zhu Yunyang summoned to confront her. The commotion caused by this incident was considerable, and it soon reached the ears of my father-in-law, who had just returned to the estate. The father-in-law sat upright in the main hall, looking at Yu Jianyang, who was weeping, then at Zhu Yunyang, who looked flustered, and demanded to know the reason in a stern voice. Yu Jianyang simply couldn't believe that the best friend she had always treated with such sincerity would scheme against her behind her back like this. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she spoke through choked sobs. "Sister, I've never harbored any ill will toward you. Why are you doing this to me? At this point, Zhu Yunyang clutched her handkerchief and broke down in tears. Jiao Wang, I don't mind you sharing the master's favor, but I absolutely cannot tolerate you giving birth to a son. My son, Lu Chuan, is the only male heir in this household. If you give birth to a son, it will inevitably undermine my son's position, and I will never allow that. Jiao Wang, as long as you don't have a child, we can be good sisters for the rest of our lives. She reached out to take Yu Jiaonang's hand. But Yu Jiaonang, her face twisted with disgust, roughly shook it off. Her father-in-law turned ashen with rage. He never would have imagined that Zhu Yunyang, who usually seemed timid and docile, could be so vicious. He immediately ordered Zhu Yunyang to be confined to a side courtyard, had her allowance cut, forbade any attendants from serving her, and left only 2 elderly servants to watch over her. As Zhu Yunyang was led away, she offered no further protest, but simply gazed tearfully and guiltily at the distraught Yu Jianyang from across the crowd. No one could have anticipated that, in less than half a day, the side courtyard would bring such tragic news. Zhu Yunyang hanged herself. Before she died, she left a final letter, acknowledging that she should never have harbored evil intentions toward Yu Jianyang. Overcome with guilt, she felt she had no choice but to atone for her sins by taking her own life. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law, who had been ill for many days, had finally recovered and couldn't wait to have Lu Chuan summoned to the main courtyard. As soon as she laid eyes on Lu Chuan, she lashed out at me, accusing May's daughter-in-law of showing no respect for my elders, being disrespectful to my mother-in-law, and causing chaos in the inner quarters, thereby disrupting the household's peace. She demanded that he immediately write a letter of divorce to cast me out. If he refused, she vowed she would not spare his birth mother, whom she deemed of lowly birth. Lu Chuan stood frozen in place, his expression grave, hesitating to put pen to paper. Just then, the servant's shout suddenly rang out from outside the courtyard. Madam, it's terrible. Concubine Zhu. Concubine Zhu has taken her own life in the side courtyard. Lu Chuan was already under pressure and seething with anger. Upon hearing the devastating news, he flew into a rage, rushed forward, and shoved his mother-in-law to the ground, still unable to vent his anger. He kicked her twice with all his might. It's you. It must be you. You wicked woman, you couldn't stand my mother, so you struck her down in secret. I'll kill you, husband. I called out from the doorway, and only then did he snap out of it, coming toward me in tears. My mother-in-law had only just recovered from an illness and was still weak. She couldn't possibly withstand such force. She curled up on the floor, her face turning deathly pale from the pain. Seeing this, Aunt Tiao hurried forward to help her up. But my mother-in-law pushed her away and glared out the door with a look of pure hatred. I left with Lu Chuan on my arm and turned back to give her a gentle smile. After that, my father-in-law felt increasingly troubled and at a loss. Lu Rian was pregnant and unable to attend to her duties, while Yu Jianyang was gloomy all day long. Seeing her only made things worse. He had no choice but to spend every night in the Luo sisters' courtyard, listening to music and watching dances to ease his worries. Lu Rian stroked her gradually swelling belly, her heart filled with resentment and loneliness. Although she was pregnant, she received not a shred of affection from her father-in-law. In her spare time, she would often confide in her maidservant. Every word of her complaints reached my ears. So I secretly sent someone to deliver a letter to Lu Rian in Lu Chuan's name. The letter stated that Lu Chuan had secretly harbored feelings for her since his youth, but lamented that fate had intervened, preventing them from spending the rest of their lives together. Now that she is expecting, I hope she takes good care of herself and enjoys a peaceful and happy life. Lu Rian was already feeling deeply wronged, and after reading the letter, she was deeply moved, finding herself utterly captivated by this secret affection. Whenever she ran into Lu Chuan, she always acted all delicate and shy. One day, I happened to catch Lu Rian holding Lu Chuan back in a secluded corner of the back garden. I immediately made up an excuse and had someone quietly lead my father-in-law over there. At that moment, Lu Rian, completely disregarding the child in her womb, clung tightly to Lu Chuan's waist, burying her face in his chest as she wept bitterly. Each word expressing the grievances and suffering she had endured as the concubine of a married man. Chuan, if I'd known it would come to this, I should have given myself to you long ago. Sniff. Lu Chuan looked completely taken aback and frantically tried to push the person away. But just then, his father-in-law arrived and caught them red-handed. The father-in-law stared at the disgraceful scene before him, trembling with rage, and shouted angrily, "You shameless slut! How dare you commit such an immoral act?" Lu Rian turned pale with fear in an instant and knelt down repeatedly, begging for mercy. Her father-in-law refused to hear her defense and immediately ordered her to be dragged to a secluded courtyard and confined there, to be dealt with only after she had given birth. Meanwhile, the mother-in-law, who was recuperating, was still restless. In front of her father-in-law, she always put on an act of being virtuous and magnanimous, and she was always kind and gentle to the Luo sisters, but behind their backs, she constantly made life difficult for them. The Luo sisters were never the kind to be pushed around. When they felt wronged, they didn't keep it to themselves. Instead, they went straight to their father-in-law, weeping and wailing as they laid bare their mother-in-law's various secret misdeeds. Seeing the endless quarrels among the women in the inner quarters, the father-in-law grew weary of it all. With a mere wave of his hand, he turned and walked away, listening to the news brought back by the maidservant. I raised my teacup and smiled faintly. This isn't over yet. My trusted aide has already set out for lynching, where my father-in-law has an old friend who now lives. That friend does not have long to live. And he has a daughter named Jiangjin. In a past life, his family sent Jiangjin to the chancellor's residence on the pretext of entrusting her to their care. His mother-in-law, who had always been jealous, feared that his father-in-law might be drawn to Jiangjin. So she decided on her own to send her to Lu Chuan's quarters. This time around, I sent someone ahead to Linqing to deliver a message, simply stating that the chancellor, out of gratitude for our past friendship, intended to take Jiangjin into his household as a concubine, and asking whether the Jiang family would agree, now that the Jiang family has fallen on hard times and the head of the family is gravely ill. For Jiangjin to become a concubine in the chancellor's mansion is already a most fortunate outcome. Upon hearing the news, Zhang's father was overjoyed. He immediately wrote a letter in his own hand, stating that he was terminally ill and willingly offered to send his daughter, Jiangjin, to the chancellor's residence to serve his excellency, asking only that the chancellor look after her in the future. A month later, Jiangjin, dressed in simple, plain clothes and accompanied by a young maidservant, entered the chancellor's residence. She had been well-read in poetry and literature since childhood and had a gentle, composed disposition, which set her apart from the other women in the household. The moment the father-in-law first laid eyes on Jiangjin, he was utterly captivated by her refined and elegant demeanor. Ever since Jiangjin had entered the household, her father-in-law would visit her courtyard whenever he had a moment to spare. There, the two of them would sip tea, discuss poetry, play the zither, and admire paintings. Jiangjin was naturally unassuming and unassuming. She never vied for anything or sought to outdo others, which only made her father-in-law cherish her all the more. His heart and eyes were filled with nothing but her. Seeing her father-in-law so attentive toward Jiangjin, the mother-in-law felt as if she had been transported back to her youth, when she used to stand by and watch her father-in-law and another woman sharing tender moments together. A fierce jealousy burning deep within her heart, she was plotting how to trip up Jiangjin and get rid of this thorn in her side as soon as possible. But this time, the father-in-law knew full well that his mother-in-law was narrow-minded. So he was prepared in advance. Any slight move on the part of the main courtyard would be stopped immediately, so it couldn't harm Jiangjin in the slightest. Her mother-in-law had made several covert attempts, but each one ended in failure. On the contrary, she was scolded by her father-in-law several times, which left her so frustrated and distressed that she once again took to her sickbed. My mother-in-law spends all day thinking of ways to deal with Jiangjin, so she has no time to scheme against me. I took this opportunity to send someone to track down Mrs. Diao's neighbors. In a past life, this woman had long been unable to conceive, so she went to a temple dedicated to fertility to pray for a child, only to be humiliated there. Overcome with grief and anger, she reported the matter to the authorities. But when the officials questioned all the women who had visited the temple that day to pray for a child, they all insisted that nothing of the sort had happened there. Unable to bear the humiliation, the woman eventually took her own life in despair. As soon as Mrs. Giao found out about this, she went straight to her mother-in-law and told her. And that was precisely why her mother-in-law decided to set a trap for me. In this lifetime, I had someone give that woman a potent fertility remedy in advance, along with a large sum of silver. I told her she need not travel all the way to the temple of childbirth to pray for a child, but that she should find an opportunity to tell Madame Giao on my behalf that the temple is extremely effective in granting children. Even women over 50 who go there to pray are able to conceive. However, she must observe a fast for 3 days and 3 nights within the temple for the prayer to be effective. Several months later, the army stationed at the frontier finally defeated the barbarians, and the good news reached the capital. The emperor issued an edict ordering the immediate return of the eldest princess, who had traveled far to a barbarian land to form an alliance through marriage. When the father-in-law heard of this, he shut himself away in his study for 3 days and 3 nights. My mind was filled with doubts. So I instructed Su Tao to secretly investigate the history between the crown princess and my father-in-law. On the day the grand princess returned to the capital, the imperial carriage moved slowly toward the palace gates. Her father-in-law, the chancellor, stood at the head of the officials in his court robes, his posture erect, yet his gaze fixed firmly on the gilded imperial carriage. The grand princess stepped down from her imperial carriage and looked around. When her gaze happened to meet that of the two men, a subtle current of tension flowed between them for a fleeting moment. There is clearly a hidden past between them. I happened to witness the entire scene from my vantage point among the women of the household. It was only later that I learned the crown princess and her father-in-law had been deeply in love in their youth, and the emperor had originally intended to marry her off to the Liu family. With barbarian tribes invading and the imperial court lacking sufficient troops, only a marriage alliance involving a princess could bring an end to the war. In the end, the eldest princess was forced to marry far away, bringing an end to their romance. As for her mother-in-law, Liu Qiaowan, she had originally served as a tutor to the eldest princess. On the day the princess departed on her marriage alliance mission, her father-in-law was overcome with grief and turned to alcohol to drown his sorrows. Liu Qiaowan took the opportunity to slip him a drug and made sure the deed was done. When it comes to this matter, Liu Rian and she are truly cut from the same cloth. Although the father-in-law felt guilty toward the eldest princess, he was bound by family honor and had no choice but to marry Liu Qiaowan into the household. Learning of these past events, I actually felt a sense of satisfaction welling up inside me. Now that the crown princess has returned, mother-in-law, what ground do you have left to stand on? After the grand princess returned to the capital, rumors that she had suffered humiliation at the hands of the barbarians spread throughout the city, and the gossip never ceased. The emperor was deeply moved by the eldest princess's plight, so he issued a proclamation to the realm. The crown princess is the most noble woman in the realm. No one is permitted to show her disrespect. Anyone who speaks ill of her shall be put to death without exception. The emperor went out of his way to host a grand banquet for the eldest princess in the palace, insisting that everyone show her the utmost respect. The eldest princess, who had seen the ups and downs of the world, had long since grown weary of the insincere niceties exchanged at banquets. Halfway through the banquet, she found an excuse to slip away and hide in a secluded corner of the palace grounds. I waited for the right moment, stepped forward slowly, and introduced myself. Your Highness, I am Su Jin, the wife of Liu Chuan, son of Chancellor Liu. The grand princess turned at the sound, her gaze cold and distant, looking at me with a touch of aloofness and wariness. I heard from the elderly servants at the manor that when my father-in-law was drunk, he would often call out, Yuan Yuan, don't go. Does your highness know who Yuan Yuan is? Yuan Yuan was the grand princess's childhood nickname. Her eyes narrowed, and she asked me in a cold tone what exactly I was up to. Your highness, my father-in-law has never forgotten you. If you wish, I can help you reconcile with him. The grand princess felt a slight stir in her heart. She looked at me, her voice still cold and distant. What do you want? I said firmly. I want the princess to help me destroy the temple of the child-praying monks. Every single monk in that temple must die. The grand princess furrowed her brow slightly. Her eyes filled with confusion. The temple of the prayer for children is a sacred place of worship. Why would anyone want to wipe it out completely? I then exposed how cheesy temple, under the pretext of praying for children, was secretly engaging in unscrupulous activities. Upon hearing this, the grand princess was utterly shocked. Thinking of the endless humiliation she had endured among the barbarians, she immediately felt a deep sense of empathy. And her heart swelled with rage. Although this matter has nothing to do with me personally, I simply cannot bear to see so many women suffering such humiliation. Today, I humbly implore your highness to avenge me and seek justice for all these women. Only your highness is capable of doing so. The grand princess nodded and said, "Very well. If I can reunite with Lu Cheng, this matter will be settled just as you wish." Having said that, she stared intently at me, a hint of scrutiny in her eyes. "Are you helping me solely for this one matter? Not to seek wealth and prestige for yourself, or to gain some other advantage, by helping your highness? I am ultimately helping myself. My mother-in-law has never been able to tolerate me, so I must secure a peaceful and carefree life for myself and my child." As soon as she finished speaking, a cold smile played on the crown princess's lips. That year, she was ordered to marry into a foreign court. No sooner had she left the capital than her former most trusted tutor resorted to any means necessary to seduce the man she loved. How could someone as despicable as Lu Qiaowan possibly deserve to stand by Lu Cheng's side? Lu Rian had been confined for many days and had finally made it to the day of her delivery. She gave birth to a baby girl after giving it her all. Lu Rian was convinced that giving birth to a child would surely win back her father-in-law's heart. But the news of the grand princess's return had long since consumed her father-in-law's every thought. He had no time to spare for her or her newborn daughter. Upon hearing that Lu Rian had given birth to a baby girl, the father-in-law simply sent word, "Let's name the child Ziyuan." After that, he continued to drink quietly in his study, without so much as a glance in her direction. Both inside and outside Lu Rian's delivery room, everyone was one of my closest confidants. I walked slowly into the inner room, looked at her lying weak and helpless on the bed, and personally helped her drink a bowl of strong herbal medicine. He then bent down, picked up the swaddled baby girl, and turned to place her in Yu Jianyang's arms. Lu Rian struggled desperately to sit up, her voice shrill as she cried out, "Su Jin, what on earth are you trying to do? I've never done anything to you. Give me back my child." I leaned in close to her ear and said coldly, with a touch of sarcasm, "Mark my words. From now on, your daughter will only be allowed to call Lady Yujiao mother. As for you, her biological mother, you'll likely not even have the right to see her again." Lu Rian watched helplessly as Yu Jianyang cradled her child, looking every bit the loving mother, and rushed forward like a madwoman, desperate to snatch the child back. Lu Rian's personal maid, Xiao immediately stepped forward and pinned her down firmly. She looked at Xiao in disbelief, then turned to glare at me with eyes full of hatred. I chuckled softly. "Do you hate me with a passion? It doesn't matter. After you're dead, I'll take my anger out on this child every single day. I'll make her go hungry and freeze, and let others bully her just as you treated my child in our past life. I'll torment her until she dies." Lu Rian's eyes were bloodshot as she shook her head frantically, vehemently denying it. "No, I didn't. I've never done anything to hurt you." Then she knelt down again and bowed her head repeatedly, begging me to spare her and her poor child. Seeing her groveling for mercy, I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. I turned away coldly and walked out, leaving her to break down in despair and weep in the delivery room until she eventually bled to death. When my father-in-law learned that Lu Rian had died from excessive bleeding, he merely instructed me in a matter-of-fact tone to see to her funeral arrangements. I found a simple coffin and gave her a hasty burial in the middle of nowhere. I didn't even leave her a headstone. It wasn't until the crown princess returned to the capital that her mother-in-law truly began to panic. Madame Diao suggested that as long as the mother-in-law gave birth to a legitimate son, her position in the chancellor's mansion would be secure. What difference would it make if the crown princess returned? Surely she wouldn't deign to become the chancellor's concubine. She then went on to talk about how her neighbor had visited a temple dedicated to fertility to pray for a child. Her mother-in-law was moved by the story, but ultimately worried that, at 35, she was likely past childbearing age. With a dejected look, she said, "At my age, I'm probably well past childbearing age. How could I possibly conceive a child now?" "Don't worry, madam. My neighbor told me that even women over 50 in the next village have managed to conceive. You're still young if you just go to that temple and fast for 3 days and 3 nights. You're sure to get what you wish for." Her words completely won over her mother-in-law, who immediately decided to go to the temple of the childgiver the next day to observe a 3-day fast and pray earnestly for a child. As soon as I heard about this, I knew they had taken the bait. I immediately sent 2 servants in disguise to follow them to the temple of the child seeker to gather intelligence, instructing them not to overlook even the smallest detail. Late that night, the monastery was silent. Yet faint sounds could be heard coming from within the walls of the abbess's meditation room. A few monks sneaked into the meditation hall through a secret passage. Looking rather lecherous, the mother-in-law and Mrs. Jiao were terrified out of their wits. Just as they were about to cry for help, the monk clamped his hand firmly over their mouths, leaving them completely powerless to resist. The monk chuckled lewdly. "Didn't you come here to pray for a child, madam? Well, my brothers and I are here to grant your wish." Afterward, a few monks whispered to each other with looks of disgust on their faces, sneering. "These 2 aren't exactly young anymore. They're really nothing special." Another man said, "Be grateful. Things have been tight lately. It's good enough just to have a woman come to you." They locked the meditation room door tight and, for 2 full days and nights, did not allow the mother-in-law or Aunt Diao to set foot outside the room. Early on the 3rd morning, I rushed to my father-in-law, feigning alarm, and said urgently, "Father, I had a nightmare last night. I dreamed that mother was pleading for help at the temple of the child. I am deeply troubled by this, and I humbly ask for your permission to take some people to the temple to check on her." The father-in-law didn't think much of it and agreed immediately. I immediately set off with my retinue of servants and maids in a grand procession for the temple of the child. As the group approached the meditation hall, they could faintly hear sounds coming from inside. I ordered my servants to immediately subdue the monk who was keeping watch, then kicked the door open. The moment the door swung open, a shocking sight met everyone's eyes, causing them all to look away in disgust. Upon hearing the news, the father-in-law rushed over, trembling with rage. He immediately drew the sword from the servant's belt and roared furiously, "You wicked woman! How dare you commit such a despicable act? I will kill you today." As he spoke, he moved forward as if to strike her. I hurriedly stepped in, pretending to stop him, and then, feigning magnanimity, urged him, "Father, please calm down. If you beat her to death in public, it will inevitably give people cause for gossip. Why not do Magistrate Liu a favor and divorce this harlot, confiscating all her dowry? That way, you will have punished her while preserving the family's reputation." Although the father-in-law was seething with rage, he felt that what was said made sense. He immediately nodded in agreement and drafted a letter of divorce to send to the magistrate's office. I ordered my men to take Lu Qiaowan and Madame Diao back to the mansion first and lock them up in the cold, damp woodshed. Looking at Lu Qiaowan, who was lying on the floor looking a sorry sight, I smiled and asked her, "Are you pleased with the gift your daughter-in-law prepared for you?" She seemed to realize something and charged at me like a madwoman, but Mrs. Liu slapped her twice, knocking her to the ground. Before long, the emperor heard that the chancellor had divorced his wife, so he summoned him to the palace and said bluntly, "Lu Cheng, you and the crown princess were once deeply in love, but fate had other plans. Now that you are alone and the crown princess has returned to court, I ask you, are you willing to rekindle your former bond with her and marry her?" The father-in-law immediately knelt down. "I would be more than happy to do so, but I fear it might be an imposition on the crown princess. I wonder what her thoughts are on the matter." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the beaded curtain at the side of the hall was gently drawn aside. The grand princess, dressed in fine robes, walked in slowly, with tears welling in her eyes. She choked out, "Brother Chung. I'm willing. Please don't reject me." The father-in-law stood up, walked quickly toward her, and they embraced tightly. The emperor immediately issued an edict arranging the marriage, and the wedding was celebrated with great pomp and ceremony. The procession stretched for 10 miles. And the entire court and the people rejoiced, with citizens from all over the city flocking to watch. On the day of the wedding, Lu Qiaowan was bound tightly in a dark corner, her mouth stuffed with a foul-smelling cloth, unable to move. She watched helplessly as her father-in-law and the crown princess exchanged vows and were married, witnessing their boundless affection. An overwhelming hatred threatened to consume her entirely. Once the wedding ceremony was over, I ordered my men to release her and simply cast her out onto the street. Now free again, Lu Qiaowan pointed at the gate of the chancellor's mansion, ready to let loose with a torrent of abuse. But just as she was about to speak, several masked thugs suddenly rushed out from the side. Without a word, they shoved her into a sack that had been waiting there, and no matter how much she struggled and screamed, it was all in vain. The sack was hoisted onto the cart, and by the time Lu Qiaowan was dragged out again, she found herself in the lowest class brothel. A beggar passing by had just squashed a flea he'd picked off his body when he looked up and spotted the newly arrived Lu Qiaowan. Without a moment's hesitation, he dragged her into the room and shouted, "I'll take this one, give me a discount. This place is utterly filthy, and one nightmare after another awaits her." After the grand princess had her wish granted, she went to the palace to report the secret matters of the Temple of the Child to the emperor. She stated bluntly that over the years, countless women had been lured into the monastery, where they suffered abuse at the hands of monks, but for fear of damaging their reputations, they had no choice but to swallow their grievances and never speak out, even until their deaths. This matter concerns the reputation of these women. It must not be made public under any circumstances. I implore you, Your Imperial Highness, to find a way to restore justice to these women. When the emperor heard of this, he was furious and immediately dispatched a group of elite soldiers to surround the Temple of the Childless under cover of night, whereupon they set the entire temple ablaze. The flames lit up half the night sky, and the suicide squad stood guard in all directions, killing any monk who tried to escape. This Buddhist sanctuary, a haven for all manner of vice, was ultimately reduced to ashes. People simply assumed that the Temple of the Child had suffered this disaster because of an accidental fire. The Grand Princess's health had been irreparably damaged, and she would never be able to bear children again. Feeling deeply guilty toward her father-in-law, she thought it over and decided to give Pan Shuang'er, the beautiful woman she had rescued earlier on the street, to her father-in-law as a concubine. Pan Shuang'er was originally a pawn I had placed by the crown princess's side, just in case she ever became another Lu Qiaowan and turned against me and my child. The emperor was moved by the eldest princess's deep affection. Far from harboring any ill will toward her, the two grew even closer. Fortunately, the crown princess was not like Lu Qiaowan. She was extremely kind to others, and peace was finally restored to the inner quarters of the chancellor's residence. One day, Lu Chuan returned to our courtyard looking dazed and with a vacant expression. Seeing him like this, I approached him and asked what had happened. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with anguish. "Jeaner, I had a very, very long nightmare last night." I understood exactly what he meant, so I asked him, "Did you dream that you took 4 beautiful concubines? That I had an affair with a monk, was cast out of the house, and suffered every kind of humiliation? That my son was covered in wounds? That my daughter starved to death?" With every word I spoke, Lu Chuan's face grew paler. "Jeaner, how did you know?" "Lu Chuan, this isn't a dream. If you hadn't been so cowardly and helpless in our past life, letting others bully and humiliate me, the 3 of us, me son, my daughter, and I, wouldn't have suffered such humiliation and met such a tragic end." Lu Chuan stood frozen in place, silent for a long time, before finally letting out a bitter laugh. No wonder we used to be so in love, and then you suddenly grew cold toward me. Jeaner, I truly have wronged you." He felt guilty and couldn't forgive himself. He didn't have the courage to face me and the children. Early the next morning, despite everyone's attempts to stop him, Lu Chuan insisted on going to a temple outside the city to take monastic vows. From then on, he devoted the rest of his life to a life of prayer and meditation. When I heard the news, I found myself inexplicably shedding tears. Later, I stopped paying attention to the turmoil outside and simply stayed quietly in my own courtyard, looking after my children. I just hope they grow up happy and live a life free from worry. That's the end of the story. Thank you all for reading. See you in the next one.